Hello, this is Gina Piscatelli with a lecture on muscle tissue for Anatomy and Physiology 1. There are three types of muscle tissue in our bodies: cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle. Cardiac muscle is what makes up our heart. Skeletal muscle tissue is located in the muscles that are attached to our bones, or the skeleton. We also find some skeletal muscle tissue in our esophagus, at least the first third of it. And smooth muscle is found in the wall of blood vessels and organs such as the bladder, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. There's also some smooth muscle in the eye. It's what helps our pupil dilate or constrict. Now, these different types of muscle tissue are controlled by the nervous system in general, yes, but which branch of the nervous system is what I'd like to discuss now. The cardiac muscle tissue is under the control of the autonomic nervous system. It's called involuntary muscle tissue or involuntary neural control. Now, the heart does beat without input from the nervous system, but it can speed up or slow down its heart rate based on input from the autonomic nervous system. We'll talk more about the autonomic nervous system when we're in Unit 3. Skeletal muscle tissue is considered voluntary. You can consciously control contraction of skeletal muscle tissue. We call this type of control somatic motor, meaning generic body, and motor means contraction of muscle, essentially. Smooth muscle tissue, found in the walls of blood vessels and organs, is not under conscious control. You cannot consciously control how dilated or constricted your blood vessels are. So we say that too is under involuntary neural control, or the autonomic nervous system. Here are pictures of the three different types of muscle tissues, and I'd like to look at the features of them briefly. We'll do some of this in lab as well. So in all cases, that is cardiac muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue, and smooth muscle tissue, the cells are called myocytes or myofibers. You could also just say muscle cell. Cardiac muscle tissue, in the picture on the left, shows some cells that are branched. So generally speaking, I'm going to outline one myocyte in cardiac muscle tissue, and generally speaking, it's branched. They're kind of interestingly shaped cells. There's only one nucleus per cell, which seems obvious, but you're going to see in skeletal muscle tissue that there's more than one nucleus per cell. Also present at the ends of a muscle cell, cardiac muscle cell, are these dark stained regions that are called intercalated discs. What these discs are gap junctions that we learned about when we talked about membrane proteins. Gap junctions allow the passage of ions in between the cytoplasm of two adjacent cells. So those are the features of cardiac muscle tissue. One other thing that's very hard to see, though, is that there are striations present in these muscle cells. We're going to see really obvious striations in our next tissue type, skeletal muscle tissue. So here's skeletal muscle tissue in the middle picture. And each cell is very large and very linear, very rectangular. So this is, I've outlined one myocyte, one muscle cell, one myofiber. Notice that at the edges of the cell, you see the nuclei. Now, first of all, what's noticeable is that there's more than one nucleus per cell. And the other thing that's obvious is that the nucleus has been pushed up against the membrane of the cell. And that's because the cytoplasm is full of proteins that help the muscle cell contract. These proteins can be seen in the striations or stripes that are light and then dark, light and then dark. Those striations are due to the fact that some of the proteins overlap in regions and make it appear dark. So a skeletal muscle cell is multinucleated and striated. Smooth muscle tissue is harder to recognize, specifically because it's hard to see the individual cells. You don't see the cell membrane as easily. These are elongated myocytes that run pretty long along the length of the wall of an organ. And the nucleus reflects the shape of the cell. Notice that the nucleus is also elongated. And we used to say that a telltale sign of smooth muscle was that the nucleus was cigar-shaped, which means tapered on the ends and thicker in the middle. That isn't very evident in this particular picture. One thing that is evident is that there are no striations visible. That doesn't mean that there aren't proteins present for contraction within the cells. There are. In all these different muscle tissue types, there are specialized proteins that help the cells contract. But the arrangement differs in the different tissue types, and so you might see striations and you might not. In smooth muscle tissue, you do not. Those are the basics of muscle tissue. Its major function is contraction, of course. And one way that I organize the tissue types in any subcategory, but in this case the muscle tissue, is I make a chart and I include location. In the case of muscle tissue, does the cell have one or more nuclei or nucleus? Are striations present or absent? What kind of neural control? And then any special features. And in cardiac muscle tissue, that would be the intercalated discs. That's all for muscle tissue. Thank you.